Shalom everybody and welcome to Torah Jewce. My name is Joshua. This week's Torah portion is Eikev. And I want to talk about some verses here in chapter 8 of the book of Devarim. You've probably heard these verses many times. Probably it doesn't matter what background you come from, whether it's a Christian background or a Jewish background, or I'm sure you've heard this verse. Is pretty popular. Let's begin in verse 1. Moshe is telling them, "The entire commandment that I command you today, you shall observe to perform, so that you may live and increase, and come and possess the land that Hashem swore to your forefathers. You shall remember the entire road on which Hashem your God led you these 40 years in the wilderness, so as to afflict you, to test you, to know what is in your heart, whether you would observe his commandments or not." Well, let's stop there for a second. The entire commandment, the entire Torah, the entire instruction, Moshe is saying that we must do, and we must observe it and perform it. Why? Well, the Torah says it very clearly, so that we may live, and that we may increase, and come to possess the land that Hashem swore to our forefathers. And then he tells us that we must remember the entire road of which Hashem your God has led you these 40 years. Now, the sages teach us that we must study the coming out of Egypt and the redemption of Egypt, the slavery from the slavery of Egypt. We should study that so that we will be able to understand the second redemption, because the second will be like the first, except there will be much greater miracles. But we must study it and know it. And to study the 40 years in the wilderness, because Hashem says he afflicted us, to test us, to know what's in our heart, to see whether we would observe the commandments or not. So you could see just in this verse alone that Hashem tests us in our wilderness, in our wandering in the wilderness. He tests us. He afflicts us. Why? Because some would say, well, some might even say, well, he does so because he is a brutal God, and he's not a just God. But we know that everything that Hashem does is for our very best. And he tests our hearts. He tests if we're going to keep and observe his commandments or not. And then verse 3, he afflicted you and let you hunger. Then he fed you manna, that you did not know, nor did your fathers know, in order to make you know that not by bread alone does man live, rather by everything that emanates from the mouth of Hashem does man live. And that's where I want to kind of camp out for a few minutes. You've heard this, that man does not live by bread alone, but by the every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Do we really believe that? Do we really believe that? Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of Hashem. Let's stop and think about that for a second. Just from the very simple understanding, it's not the food that we eat that keeps us alive. It's the words that come from Hashem that keeps us alive. Then we must ask ourselves, first off, what are the words that are coming from the mouth of Hashem? Second of all, where's the bread coming from? Okay? So we have two things that come together. The bread and the words from the mouth of Hashem, according to this verse. These two things come together to help us to live. Because if you cease to eat, you would surely starve and you would die. So you need to eat the food. But he makes it very clear here that he afflicted us in the wilderness to make us hunger, so that he could bring us manna, which we did not even know. The manna, the heavenly food, the sustenance that he brings to us, that we didn't even know about, to prove to us once again that he is in control and that everything he does is for his glory and is for our good. But we don't live by just the food that we eat. We live on the words that come from the mouth of Hashem. So if we are just going through life, just living off the food that we eat, we're only living half a life. We're not living completely and fully, because we are not seeking out the words of Hashem. Though, on one level, or on some level, excuse me, we are still living through the words of Hashem, because Hashem sustains everything. He keeps us alive each and every day. We don't cause our heart to beat. We don't cause necessarily our breathing. It is kind of an automatic reflex. We don't think about causing our eye muscles to focus or our brains to do certain things. We don't think about our skin renewing itself or our body digesting food. We don't have to give those specific commands. Those are all done and processed. Why? Because Hashem made it so. That's how we live. When we can fully grasp this and really contemplate this, we understand that it's not just the food. It's not the food. It's what comes from Hashem. Everything comes from Hashem. Everything comes from Hashem. And we must understand this. And this is when we begin to live. We begin to understand this. And we know. So it's not by bread, not just by bread. And you could take this even further. It's not by bread that keeps us alive. There are certain individuals in history who claim to be the bread of life. You know who I'm speaking of. But here it says, not by bread alone does man live. Okay? Not by bread alone does man live, but from the words of the mouth of Hashem, the Torah. We must learn the Torah. We must know. We were built, we were fashioned, we were created through this wonderful blueprint called the Torah. And when we connect to it, we begin to understand what our purpose is. We begin to understand. Now, I know that there are those, and we've spoken of this before, who think that Torah is only for the Jews. But I disagree. I mean, I'm a Jew, but I don't agree. The Torah was made for everyone. The Jews are we are supposed to be lights to the nations. We are supposed to do and fulfill the Torah and teach the nations how to do the same. That is our job, to be lights, to show the Torah. Remember, we spoke a few weeks ago in another Torah Jewce about this very subject. Okay, that the nations would look to us and say, what a great and knowledgeable and wise people, because who else was given these wonderful ordinances and commandments? And they will follow, and they will look, and they will inquire, and they will want to follow our example. But if we don't do them correctly, if we chase after other gods and after the customs and traditions of other nations, then we're not fulfilling our duty in being lights. So we must, all of us, we must look to the Torah. We must look. Christians, you follow Jesus. Jesus was a Jew. He followed Torah 100%. He never got rid of Torah. In fact, he commands you to follow the Torah and do everything in it. Anybody who teaches you differently is a false teacher. And I know those are harsh words, but those of you who maybe think that the Torah does not, and God's law does not pertain to you, read the words of Jesus and see what he actually says. He says that the Pharisees said in Moshe's seat, whatever they do, whatever they say, you must do. And some would even say that's not really the correct translation. It's whatever Moshe says. Okay, let's go that way. whatever Moshe says you must do. Well, right here he's telling you should observe and perform all of the commandments. And those of you who feel like your replacement theology, that you have replaced the Jewish people as Israel, well, if that's the case, then the covenant resides with you, then you too are responsible for keeping all of the commandments and being the light. So either way, you still have to fulfill God's law. And those who speak negatively against God's law are false teachers. It's just plain and simple. The Torah is the words that come from the mouth of Hashem. And right here it tells you that those words, everything that emanates from the mouth of Hashem does man live. That's what the Torah says. So if you're trying to tell me that the law is not applicable to today, then you're speaking against Torah, because right there it says it. And these commandments all came from the mouth of Hashem. That makes them holy and good. And it means that we all have to abide by them and follow them and learn from them to the best of our abilities. You don't have to agree, excuse me, but it's right there in the Torah. So if you believe that Hashem's word is true, there it is. There isn't anything that tells you Jesus never did take away the Torah. Not ever. In fact, he upheld it 100%. And I know there are those who think in some of the books and the writings of the New Testament that it says that the law, it says the curse of the law was nailed to the cross. Doesn't say anything about you don't have to do the law anymore. Doesn't say that God's law is done. It never says that. But even then, where does your Messiah Jesus say that, well, now that I'm dead, or now that I died and came back to life, that the Torah, God's perfect law that emanated from his mouth, by which you live according to this verse in Deuteronomy, is no longer applicable to you. You don't have to do any of that. It's okay. Do what you want. Live how you want. You don't have to follow these rules anymore. That's not what it says. It never says that. And he never said that, by the way. So just start reading the Torah and read what God says. Read what he says about how we should live and the things that we should do. Don't be overwhelmed. Start somewhere. We all had to start somewhere to learn, to begin to understand. So please, we don't live just by bread. We live by the words that come from the mouth of Hashem. And that is important. Thank you so much for watching. May Hashem bless you and keep you. And hopefully we'll see you next time. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment box below. Thank you so much. Shalom.